My name is Private James Jimmy Callahan, and I'm writing this from a place that doesn't exist on any map. They told us it would be routine, a listening post deep in the Amazon rainforest, monitoring Soviet radio chatter during the height of the Cold War. Just 6 months of shifts, sweat, and boredom before we'd rotate back to civilization. That's what Lieutenant Benjamin Graves promised us when we loaded onto those transport planes in February 1967. I should have known better. I'd been in the Army long enough to recognize when officers were lying through their teeth. Back home in Pittsburgh, my wife Dorothy is 7 months pregnant with our first child. I can still smell the lavender perfume she wore the morning I left. Still feel her hand pressed against my chest as she tried not to cry. "Come back to me, Jimmy," she'd whispered. "Promise me you'll come back." I promised. God forgive me, I promised. The base, if you could call it that, squatted in a clearing carved from jungle so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. Prefabricated metal buildings, razor wire perimeter, motion sensors that beeped constantly from false alarms triggered by monkeys and birds. 32 of us crammed into a facility designed for 20, working 12-hour shifts in rooms that smelled like mildew, rust, and desperation. Lieutenant Graves commanded our operation with the kind of rigid discipline that came from West Point training and a father who'd been a decorated colonel. Tall, square-jawed, with eyes that never seemed to blink, he ran drills twice daily and inspected our quarters like we were preparing for the president himself. The men respected him. I didn't trust him. Maybe it was the way he'd stare at the jungle during his smoke breaks, like he was waiting for something, or how he'd disappear into the communications room for hours with Master Sergeant Frank Wolcott, our signals expert, emerging with maps covered in markings that made no sense for a listening post operation. Wolcott was different from Graves. Where the lieutenant was all polish and protocol, Wolcott was rough edges and cigarette-stained fingers. A Korean War veteran with a face like cracked leather, he knew radio equipment better than anyone I'd ever met. But there was something haunted in his eyes, something that suggested he'd heard things over those radio waves that kept him awake at night. The rest of our unit fell into the usual military hierarchy. Corporal Eugene "Buster" Walsh handled logistics with an efficiency that bordered on obsessive. Private First Class Raymond Tucker manned the perimeter with his rifle and a photograph of his girl back in Alabama that he kissed every morning. Specialist Arthur Brennan, our medic, kept mostly to himself, reading medical journals by flashlight and muttering about tropical diseases. Then there was Sergeant Vincent Russo, our second in command and the man everyone genuinely liked. Russo had a wife and 3 kids in Boston, and he'd show their pictures to anyone who'd listen. "This is Vinny Jr. He's gonna be a baseball player," he'd say, beaming with pride. "And little Maria, she's smart as a whip. Gonna be a doctor someday." Russo was the glue that held us together when the humidity and isolation started wearing on nerves. He'd organize card games, tell jokes that actually landed, and had this way of making you forget, just for a moment, that we were stuck in hell's waiting room. I was nobody special, just a private who kept his head down, followed orders, and counted the days until I could hold Dorothy again. But I watched, I listened, and I noticed things that others missed, like how the jungle went silent 3 days after we arrived. Not gradually, instantly, like someone had thrown a switch. One moment, the constant symphony of birds, insects, and howling monkeys. The next, Nothing but oppressive quiet that pressed against your eardrums. Lieutenant Graves noticed, too. I saw him standing at the perimeter fence that first silent morning, hands clenched on the wire, jaw working like he was grinding his teeth to powder. "Sir?" I'd approached cautiously. "The wildlife dismissed, Private." He'd cut me off, voice sharp as broken glass. "Return to your post." I should have pressed, should have demanded answers, but I was just a private, and questioning officers was a good way to end up on latrine duty for the rest of the deployment. That was my first mistake. It wouldn't be my last. October 9th, 1967, 3:47 a.m., night watch. The communications room hummed with the steady drone of equipment, vacuum tubes glowing amber, reels spinning on tape decks, static crackling through speakers like distant rain. Master Sergeant Wolcott hunched over the main console, headphones clamped tight over his ears, fingers dancing across frequency dials with practiced precision. I sat behind him at the secondary station, monitoring backup channels and logging signal patterns in the duty roster. Routine work, mind-numbing work, the kind that made your eyelids heavy and your thoughts drift to Dorothy, to the baby we'd name either Michael or Sarah, depending on what God decided to bless us with. The coffee in my tin cup had gone cold hours ago, tasting like battery acid and regret. I could smell the sharp tang of electrical components overheating, mixed with Wolcott's perpetual cigarette smoke and the mildew that infected everything in this jungle hell. "Callahan," Wolcott said suddenly, his voice tight. "You hearing this?" I pulled my headphones on, tuning to his frequency. Through the white noise came something that made the hair on my neck stand up. A rhythmic pulsing, like a heartbeat transmitted through deep space. Not random interference, deliberate, purposeful. "What frequency is that, Sergeant?" His hand trembled as he adjusted the dial. "That's the thing, Private. This frequency shouldn't exist. It's below our operational range, subsonic almost, but somehow we're picking it up clear as day." The heartbeat sound grew louder, layering with other pulses until they created a syncopated rhythm that made my chest feel tight. Then came the voices. Not words, not language, just human-like echoes that rose and fell like a tide pulling at something deep in my brain. "Jesus Christ," Wolcott whispered, and I'd never heard fear in his voice before, not like this. "Jimmy, get Lieutenant Graves. Get him now. Don't run. Walk normal. Don't wake the others yet." I moved quickly but quietly through the narrow corridor connecting the comm room to officers' quarters. My boots echoed on metal grating, each step measured, controlled. But inside, my heart hammered against my ribs in time with that transmission. Lieutenant Graves answered my knock immediately, like he'd been awake, waiting. He was fully dressed, despite the hour, uniform crisp, brass buttons gleaming even in the dim emergency lighting. "Private Callahan." His voice was calm, unsurprised. "I assume Sergeant Wolcott has made contact." Made contact. Not picked up interference or found something unusual. Made contact, like he'd been expecting this. "Sir, there's a transmission on an impossible frequency. Wolcott says." "I know what Wolcott says." Graves moved past me, long strides eating up the corridor. "Assemble the senior staff. Russo, Walsh, Brennan, and Private Tucker. Quietly. No general alarm yet." "Sir, what's—" "That's an order, Private." Within 10 minutes, 6 of us crowded into the communications room. The transmission had grown louder, no longer needing headphones. It poured through the speakers, filling the space with that rhythmic pulse and those almost voices that made your teeth ache. Sergeant Russo's face had gone pale, one hand pressed against his chest. "Lieutenant, this ain't right. This ain't Soviet, ain't American, ain't anything I ever heard in Korea." "It's a signal," Graves said, staring at the oscilloscope display showing impossible waveforms. "Someone, something is broadcasting. Sergeant Wolcott, can you triangulate the source?" Wolcott's cigarette had burned down to ash between his fingers. "Already working on it, sir." If I can get a stable reading, maybe 30 minutes for coordinates." Corporal Walsh leaned against the doorframe, his logistics-trained mind trying to rationalize the irrational. Could be equipment malfunction, feedback loop in the system, harmonics creating auditory patterns that seem structured but are actually, "It's not a malfunction," Graves cut him off. His jaw worked, grinding invisible grit between his molars. "I've heard this before. Different location, different time, but the same signal." The room went silent except for that pulse, that terrible heartbeat that seemed to sync with our own. "Sir?" I found my voice. "When? Where did you hear this before?" Graves turned, and for the first time since we'd arrived, I saw something crack in his perfect military facade. Fear, raw and ancient. Siberia, 1962. I was attached to a CIA listening post monitoring Soviet Arctic operations. We picked up this exact signal. 17 men were stationed there. He paused, eyes distant. 3 made it out. Russo crossed himself. "What happened to the others?" "They answered," Graves said quietly. "They heard the call, and they answered. And what came back wearing their faces wasn't them anymore." The transmission pulsed louder, and somewhere in the jungle's silence something moved. Lieutenant Graves ordered everyone except Wolcott and me out of the communications room. Russo protested, but one look from Graves shut him down. The others filed out, leaving us 3 alone with that pulsing transmission and the weight of secrets about to be revealed. Graves lit a cigarette with shaking hands. I'd never seen him shake before. "What I'm about to tell you stays between us until I decide otherwise. Understood?" He didn't wait for acknowledgement. In 1962, I was a freshly minted second lieutenant assigned to a joint CIA Army intelligence operation in the Siberian wilderness. Our mission was identical to this one: monitor Soviet communications, report unusual activity. He took a long drag, smoke curling toward the ceiling fans that barely moved the humid air. "We picked up this signal on November 14th. Same heartbeat pattern, same voices underneath. Our commanding officer, Colonel Marcus Henshaw, ordered us to triangulate and investigate. He was convinced it was some new Soviet psychological warfare weapon." Walcott leaned forward, cigarette forgotten. "What did you find?" "A structure. Ancient stone poles arranged in a circle around a mound in the permafrost. The local Yakut people had legends about that place, called it the Whispering Mouth. They said it was a door to the underworld, that their ancestors had sealed it with blood and prayer thousands of years ago." Graves's eyes went distant, seeing something we couldn't. Colonel Henshaw didn't believe in legends. He ordered excavation. We dug for 3 days, and on the 4th day we broke through the ice into a chamber beneath the mound. The transmission got so loud it bled through our equipment, through the walls, through our skulls. My mouth had gone dry. I could taste copper, smell the ozone building in the air around us. The men started changing that night. First it was Private Danny Morrison, farm kid from Iowa, sweetest guy you'd ever meet. He walked out of our barracks at 0200 hours, walked straight into the blizzard without gear, without speaking. We found him 3 days later, frozen solid, but his eyes were still open, still aware, still screaming silently from inside. Walcott stubbed out his cigarette. "How many did you lose?" 14 in the first week. They'd hear the signal and just go, walk toward the structure, toward that opening we'd uncovered. Colonel Henshaw ordered armed guards, restraints, sedation. Nothing worked. When they heard the call strongly enough, their strength became inhuman. They'd break free and disappear into the snow. "Jesus," I whispered. "How'd you survive?" "I didn't want to." Graves's voice cracked. "I heard it too, Jimmy. Every night, pulling at me, promising peace, promising answers to questions I'd never asked, but suddenly couldn't stop asking. The only reason I didn't answer was because Corporal David Chen tackled me halfway to the perimeter fence and knocked me unconscious. He pulled something from his pocket, a tarnished silver cross on a chain. Chen gave me this, said his grandmother blessed it, said it would protect against evil spirits. I thought he was superstitious. I wore it to humor him. Graves's hand closed around the cross. 2 nights later, Chen answered the call. I watched him walk into the darkness, and I couldn't stop him because I was too weak, too broken to even move. The transmission pulsed harder, and I felt it in my chest, that pull, that invitation. The 3 of us who survived, me, a Russian translator named Sarah Kozlov, and our radio operator, Lieutenant Pete Drummond. We collapsed the structure with thermite charges, burned everything, sealed the opening with explosives and concrete. The signal stopped immediately. "Did command believe you?" Walcott asked. They classified everything, discharged the 3 of us with full psych evaluations and NDAs that could land us in Leavenworth for life if we talked. They told me it was mass hallucination from carbon monoxide poisoning, that the men who died walked off due to mental breakdown. Graves met my eyes, and I saw the truth burning there. But they also reassigned me here, to this exact location, where satellite imaging showed similar geological formations. They wanted me here when, not if, the signal started again. Because I'm not here to monitor Soviets, Private Callahan. I'm here to finish what that operation started, to find the source and destroy it permanently. "Why tell us this now?" I asked. "Because we're going to need help. And because when this goes wrong, and it will go wrong, someone needs to survive to tell the real story." He looked at Walcott. "How long until you have coordinates?" Walcott checked his equipment. 20 minutes, Lieutenant, maybe less." "Good." Graves crushed his cigarette under his boot. "Then we're going in at first light. And God help us all." The transmission beat steadily, calling, inviting. And somewhere in my mind I felt something respond. Dawn broke over the Amazon with the kind of oppressive heat that made breathing feel like drowning. The jungle remained silent. No birds, no insects. Nothing but our ragged breathing and the distant pulse of that transmission bleeding through Walcott's portable receiver. Lieutenant Graves assembled 8 of us at the perimeter gate. Me, Walcott, Sergeant Russo, Corporal Walsh, Private Tucker, Specialist Brennan, our medic, and 2 others I barely knew. Private Leonard Hayes from Tennessee, and Private First Class Martin O'Connor, a quiet kid from Chicago who joined up to escape factory work. Coordinates placed the source 2 kilometers west-southwest. Graves briefed us, voice clipped and military precise. "Deep in unmapped territory. We observe, we document, we return. No heroics. If this is what I think it is, we'll need heavy equipment and a proper demolition plan." Russo adjusted his pack, sweat already staining his uniform. "And if it ain't what you think, Lieutenant? Then we adapt." Graves checked his sidearm. "Standard loadout. M14 rifles, enough ammunition to fight our way back if needed. Brennan, bring your full medical kit. Walcott, keep that receiver active. I want constant signal strength readings." I caught Russo's eye as we geared up. He looked worried, one hand touching the photograph of his family tucked inside his vest pocket. 3 kids and a wife waiting in Boston. I thought of Dorothy, 7 months pregnant, waiting for letters I'd stopped being able to write because what could I say? That the jungle was quiet? That we'd found something impossible? "You got a bad feeling about this, Jimmy?" Russo asked quietly. "Yeah, Sarge. Real bad." He nodded, checking his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Me too. But Graves saved my ass in Korea. If he says we need to do this, then we do it. That's what soldiers do. We follow orders, even when they scare us." The jungle swallowed us within minutes of leaving the perimeter. The canopy overhead blocked the sun. casting everything in sickly green twilight. Vines hung like nooses, thick as a man's arm, dripping with moisture that wasn't quite rain. The ground squelched with every step, releasing gases that smelled like rotting meat and sulfur. Walsh led point, machete cutting through undergrowth with mechanical precision. Behind him, Graves moved like a man possessed, eyes scanning constantly, jaw set in grim determination. Walcott followed, one hand on his receiver, the other on his sidearm. I stayed in the middle of the formation with Tucker and Hayes, rifle ready, every nerve screaming that we should turn back. The air tasted wrong, metallic and thick, like licking a battery. My ears popped constantly as if we were changing altitude, though the terrain stayed flat. "Signal's getting stronger," Walcott called out after 30 minutes of trudging through hell. "Much stronger. Whatever's broadcasting, we're close." O'Connor stumbled behind me, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Anyone else feel that? Like pressure in your chest?" I felt it. A vibration that matched the transmission's heartbeat, pushing against my ribs from the inside. Brennan noticed it too, pressing one hand to his sternum, medical training warring with growing fear. "Lieutenant," Brennan said carefully, "we should consider the possibility of subsonic weapons testing, Soviet or otherwise. Prolonged exposure to frequencies below 20 Hz can cause disorientation, anxiety, even hallucinations." "This isn't a weapon," Graves said flatly. "Keep moving." After an hour, Tucker raised his fist. We froze. He pointed ahead, and my stomach dropped. Shapes in the undergrowth, tall, thin poles maybe 10 feet high, arranged in a perfect circle around a clearing. Vines covered them, but underneath I could see carvings, geometric patterns that hurt to look at, that made my eyes water and my head pound. In the center of the circle sat a mound of earth, perfectly round, topped with stones arranged in concentric rings. The stones hummed audibly, resonating with the transmission. "Mother of God," Russo whispered, crossing himself. Walsh circled the perimeter, analytical mind trying to process the impossible. "These poles are old, months, maybe years. But the vegetation growth pattern is wrong, too uniform, too deliberate." Graves approached the mound slowly, reverently, almost like a pilgrim approaching a shrine. His hand went to the silver cross around his neck. "It's the same," he breathed. "Exactly the same as Siberia. Same configuration, same patterns, same." He turned to us, and I saw something terrible in his eyes. Not fear anymore, hunger. "Sergeant Russo, secure the perimeter. Walsh, start documenting everything. Brennan, soil samples. Walcott, signal analysis." "Sir," I said, "maybe we should pull back, call for reinforcements, like you said." "Negative, Private. We're already here. We gather intelligence first." The vibration in my chest intensified. The stones on the mound pulsed brighter, their hum growing into something like words in a language I'd never heard, but somehow understood. They were calling, and part of me wanted desperately to answer. Russo grabbed my shoulder, grounding me. "Stay sharp, Jimmy. Don't listen. Think about Dorothy. Think about that baby coming. Don't let it in." But Graves was already climbing the mound, and I realized with cold certainty that he'd brought us here not to observe. He'd brought us here to open something that should have stayed sealed. "Lieutenant, step away from the mound." Russo's voice cut through the humming, sharp and commanding. Graves didn't respond. He stood at the peak of the structure, hands hovering over the stone arrangement, fingers tracing patterns in the air like he was reading invisible instructions. Brennan knelt at the mound's base, digging with gloved hands through the dark soil. He pulled out the first fragment, a bone, human-sized but structurally wrong, too porous, too light, with ridges that didn't match any anatomy chart I'd memorized during basic training. "Lieutenant Graves," Brennan's voice cracked. "Sir, there are remains here, multiple individuals, and the bone structure it's been altered, changed at a cellular level." Walsh moved closer, his logistics-trained mind struggling to rationalize. "Altered how? Disease? Radiation exposure? I don't know." Brennan pulled out more fragments. A femur with joints that bent wrong, vertebrae with too many articulation points. His hands shook as he laid them out on the ground. This shouldn't be possible. The calcium density, the marrow cavities. It's like human bones rebuilt by something that didn't quite understand human anatomy. The transmission pulsed harder. The stones began to glow with that pale bioluminescence I'd seen in my nightmares since Graves told us about Siberia. And Lieutenant Benjamin Graves, West Point graduate and decorated officer, pressed his hands against the central stone. "Sir, don't," I shouted, but my voice sounded distant, drowned by the heartbeat filling my skull. The stone shifted under his touch, not crumbling, opening. The concentric rings rotated with mechanical precision, ancient gears grinding beneath the earth. A gap appeared in the center, widening into a hole that exhaled cold air that smelled like copper and centuries of decay. "My God," Graves whispered, and his voice held wonder, not horror. "It's real. It's all real. The gateway, the source, everything Chen told me before he trailed off, staring into that darkness like Moses seeing the promised land. Lieutenant Benjamin Graves, I'm ordering you to step away from that structure." Russo moved forward, rifle raised but not aimed. "As senior NCO, I'm exercising emergency authority under Article. You have no authority here, Sergeant." Graves turned, and his eyes had changed. Not clouded like the infected in his Siberia stories, but bright, fevered, burning with purpose. "Everything I've done, every lie I've told, every man I've sacrificed, it was all leading here. Command didn't send me to observe. They sent me to open it, to make contact, to bring back proof that we're not alone." Walsh backed away slowly. "Lieutenant, you're not making sense. We need to return to base, file a proper report." "Reports?" Graves laughed, and the sound was wrong, disconnected. "I've been filing reports for 5 years, 12 different sites across 4 continents. Every time, Command orders me to investigate, to document, to get closer to the source. You think this is coincidence? You think they put me here by accident?" O'Connor's voice shook. "What are you saying, sir?" "I'm saying I was never meant to destroy these sites." Graves pulled out a second radio from his pack. Military issue but modified. Frequency crystals that didn't match our standard equipment. I was meant to activate them, to create a network, to open enough doors that whatever's beneath finally has enough nodes to emerge fully. The radio crackled to life, and through the static came voices. Human voices, speaking English. "Station 7, confirm status. Has the primary gateway been breached?" Graves keyed the microphone. "Confirmed. Gateway open. Standing by for Phase 2 protocols. Copy. Station 7, maintain position. Extraction team inbound with secondary equipment. Estimated arrival 48 hours. Russo's rifle came up. Aimed now, no hesitation. "You son of a bitch. You've been working with them from the start. Not with them, Sergeant. For something bigger than Soviet-American politics. For evolution. For transcendence." Graves gestured to the opening. "The transmission isn't a threat. It's an invitation, a chance to become something more than what we are." Tucker moved to flank Graves, his Alabama drawl tight with betrayal. "Those men in Siberia, the ones who walked into the blizzard. You said they were victims." I lied. Graves smiled, and it was the most honest expression I'd seen on his face since we arrived. "They were pioneers. First contact. And now, so are we." The hole in the mound widened. From its depths came sounds, not the transmission's heartbeat, but movement, physical movement, things climbing up from darkness that had held them for millennia. Brennan grabbed his medical kit and ran. Hayes followed, crashing through undergrowth in blind panic. Walsh stood frozen, his analytical mind finally breaking under impossible reality. I raised my rifle, aimed at Graves, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Sir, please think about what you're doing. Think about the men counting on you." "I am thinking about them, Private Callahan." Graves stepped aside, revealing the full opening. "I'm thinking about how they'll be remembered as the first, the ones who opened the door, the ones who welcomed humanity's next phase." From the darkness came a hand, pale, elongated, with too many joints, then another, then a face that might have been human once, before something rebuilt it into a better design. Russo fired. 3 controlled bursts, center mass, perfect grouping. The figure jerked but kept climbing, kept emerging, those wrong joints bending in ways that made my eyes water. "Fall back!" Russo roared. "Everyone fall back, now!" We ran. Walsh, O'Connor, Tucker, Walcott, and me, crashing through jungle that seemed to grab at us with vine fingers and root teeth. Behind us, Graves' laughter echoed, mixed with the transmission's pulse and the sounds of things pulling themselves into sunlight for the first time in ages. Brennan and Hayes were already gone, swallowed by green shadows. We'd lost them in seconds. 5 of us ran toward base, but the jungle had changed. The paths we'd marked were gone. The red chemical lights Walcott had placed had been moved, leading us in circles, deeper into territory that existed on no map. And overhead, through breaks in the canopy, I saw helicopters, military helicopters, coming not to rescue us, but to join whatever Graves had begun. We weren't the investigators. We were the test subjects, and the experiment had just started. We burst through the tree line, expecting to see our base. Razor wire, prefabricated buildings, salvation. Instead, we found chaos. The perimeter fence had been torn open from the inside. Motion sensors dangled from posts, sparking and dead. Bodies lay scattered across the compound, but they weren't still. They twitched, jerked, pulled themselves upright with movements that bent joints backward and sideways. "Sweet Jesus," Tucker breathed, rifle shaking in his hands. I recognized faces. Private Danny Fisher from Minnesota, who'd shown me pictures of his fishing boat. Corporal Tom Bradley, who'd beaten everyone at poker 3 nights running. Specialist Mike Chen, whose grandmother had sent care packages with homemade cookies every month. All of them moving now with that same puppet string wrongness I'd seen climbing from the mound. "The base is compromised," Wolcott said. "The transmission must have activated while we were gone. Everyone inside, everyone listening to equipment, they all heard it at once." Walsh gripped his machete, knuckles white. "Then where do we go?" "There's no extraction point, no backup. We're 200 miles from the nearest military installation." "We go back," Russo said quietly. He wasn't looking at the base anymore. He was looking at us, at me, at Tucker, at Walsh, at Wolcott and O'Connor. 5 men who still had a chance. "We go back to that mound, and we close what Graves opened." "Sarge, that's suicide," O'Connor protested. "Graves has backup coming. Radio said 48 hours. We can't." "We can." Russo pulled out the photograph of his family. Maria, Vinny Jr., little Rosa, and his wife Catherine, smiling at the camera on some Boston street. He stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it carefully into my vest pocket. But I can't. My throat tightened. Sarge, someone's gotta buy you time, Jimmy. Someone's gotta hold here, keep these things from following while you four make it back to that clearing. His voice stayed steady, but his eyes were wet. I got 3 kids. 3 beautiful kids who need to grow up in a world where this shit stays buried, where their old man's sacrifice meant something. Tucker's voice cracked. Sergeant Russo, we can fight together. No. Russo handed Tucker his ammunition pouches, his grenades, everything except his rifle and 2 magazines. You fight smart. You get to that mound. You collapse it, burn it, bury it so deep nothing ever digs it back up. That's an order. He looked at Wolcott. Frank, you're the best radio man I ever served with. If anyone can figure out how to jam their signal, it's you. To Walsh, Eugene, your logistics brain is gonna be what gets them through. Calculate the fastest route, the safest approach. To O'Connor, Martin, you're young, but you're tough. Chicago tough. Don't let that factory worker grit fail you now. Then he turned to me, and I saw everything he couldn't say. All the fear, all the love for his family, all the desperate hope that we'd succeed where he couldn't. Jimmy Callahan, you're gonna survive this because you got something worth surviving for. That baby needs a father. Dorothy needs her husband. You write this down. You tell everyone what really happened here. You make sure Graves and whoever sent him face justice. Sarge, please, that's an order, Private. He gripped my shoulder hard enough to bruise. Now go, before I change my mind. We didn't want to leave him. Every instinct screamed to stay, to fight together, to die together if that's what it took. But Russo was right. He was always right. Walsh led us east, skirting the base perimeter. Behind us, Russo opened fire, controlled bursts, conserving ammunition, every shot precise. The infected turned toward the sound, shambling away from us, giving us the opening we needed. We ran. Russo's gunfire continued for 3 minutes, then 4, then 5, longer than should have been possible with 2 magazines. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound because I knew what it meant. Sergeant Vincent Russo, husband to Catherine, father to Maria, Vinnie Jr. and Rosa, had made his stand, had bought us time with his life. And I carried his family photograph against my heart like a talisman, like a promise I had to keep. The jungle closed around us as we pushed deeper, following Wolcott's compass bearing back toward the mound. The transmission pulsed stronger now, broadcasting from that open gateway, calling more things up from beneath. Tucker wiped tears from his face, smearing dirt and sweat. He was the best of us. He still is, Walsh said firmly, and we're gonna make his sacrifice count. O'Connor's voice was barely audible. How? We're 4 men with rifles against whatever Graves unleashed, against helicopters coming with reinforcements, against orders, Wolcott interrupted, pulling out his modified radio equipment. Graves had specialized gear, command frequency crystals, which means there's a command structure coordinating this operation. His fingers worked quickly, adjusting settings. If I can tap into their network, maybe I can warn someone outside this conspiracy, someone who'll listen. And if you can't, I asked. Wolcott met my eyes. Then we do what Russo would have done. We fight anyway, because that's what soldiers do when everything goes to hell. We hold the line. We moved through darkness that felt alive, hostile, aware. The jungle pressed closer with every step, vines grabbing, roots rising to trip us. Things moved in the shadows, not animals, Not anymore, but shapes that had once been our brothers. Hayes stumbled into our path, or what was left of Hayes. His face was wrong, stretched, eyes positioned at angles that shouldn't exist. His mouth moved, forming words in that transmission language I couldn't understand, but felt pulling at something primal in my brain. Tucker fired without hesitation. Hayes dropped, but he kept moving, kept crawling toward us with determination that death couldn't stop. "Run," Walsh commanded. "Don't engage. Just run." We ran through hell, through jungle transformed into nightmare, through air thick with transmission pulse and the smell of things rotting and being reborn simultaneously. And ahead, through the trees, I saw the glow, that pale bioluminescence marking the mound, the gateway, the source of everything wrong. Graves would be there. The things from below would be there. Whatever backup he'd called would arrive soon. But Russo had given us a chance. A small chance, bought with blood and sacrifice, and a father's love for children he'd never see again. We couldn't waste it. We wouldn't waste it. For Russo, for his family, for Dorothy and the baby I'd promised to come home to. We were going to close that gateway, or die trying. We took cover in a collapsed section of jungle where a massive kapok tree had fallen, creating a natural bunker of roots and earth. Walcott spread his radio equipment across the ground, hands working with fevered precision while the rest of us maintained watch. The mound was visible through the trees, maybe 300 meters away. The gateway pulsed with that sickly bioluminescence, and shapes moved around it. Human shapes, but wrong. Graves stood at the center like a priest before an altar, arms raised, speaking words that carried on air thick with transmission. "I've got their frequency," Walcott whispered, adjusting his headphones. "Multiple channels, command coordination, status updates, and..." He went pale. "Jesus Christ. There are 17 sites. 17 active gateways across South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, all opened within the last 72 hours. Walsh crawled closer, keeping his head down. 17? How is that coordinated? Operation Threshold. Walcott's voice shook as he transcribed the radio traffic. That's the code name. Multinational effort. US, Soviet, British intelligence, all working together despite Cold War politics. They've been preparing this for 15 years. Since 1952, O'Connor's hands clenched his rifle. Why? Why would governments cooperate to unleash this? Because they think they can control it. Walcott pulled off his headphones, face ashen. They think whatever comes through these gateways can be weaponized, studied, used. The transmission doesn't kill, it transforms. They want that transformation. Want to create soldiers who don't need sleep, don't feel pain, don't question orders. Tucker spat into the dirt. Super soldiers. They're trying to make goddamn super soldiers out of those things. Not just soldiers. Walcott showed us his notes, transcribed coordinates, site designations, casualty projections. They're planning to expose entire populations, selected cities, test the transformation on mass scale, see how it spreads, how it can be directed. My stomach turned. That's genocide. That's evolution, they're calling it. Walcott's cigarette-stained fingers trembled. Directed evolution. Humanity 2.0. And Graves is just one operative in a network spanning the globe. Walsh studied the notes with his logistics mind. If there are 17 sites and they're all connected, then destroying one won't stop the program. No, Walcott agreed. but there's a primary node, a central hub that coordinates the transmission across all sites. He pointed to a frequency notation. It's here, beneath this mound. If we collapse the hub, the entire network might destabilize. Might buy time for someone to shut down the other sites. Might, O'Connor said. That's not exactly a solid plan, Sergeant. It's all we've got, son. Walcott began packing his equipment. But there's something else. I've been monitoring their extraction timeline. Those helicopters Graves called, they're not coming in 48 hours. They're coming in 4 hours. My watch read 14:30. By 18:30, this place would be swarming with reinforcements who'd ensure the gateway stayed open, who'd secure the site, and begin phase 2 of whatever nightmare they'd planned. Then we move now, Walsh said, checking his remaining ammunition. Before they arrive, before Graves can establish defensive positions. Tucker loaded his rifle with grim determination. 4 against whatever's down there, plus Graves, plus those things he's already pulled through. Not great odds. Better than Rousseau had, I said quietly, touching the photograph over my heart. And he bought us this chance. We don't waste it. Walcott pulled out a bundle of thermite charges Walsh had carried from the supply shed during our first recon. I've been saving these. If we can place them directly at the gateway opening, the heat should collapse the structural integrity. Seal it permanently. That requires getting past Graves and his new friends, O'Connor pointed out. And he knows we're out here. He's been waiting for us to come back. Then we give him what he expects, Walsh said, his analytical mind finding tactical solutions. Frontal assault. Loud and obvious. Draw their attention while someone else plants the charges. Someone meaning me, I said. The words came out before I could think them through, but once spoken, I knew they were right. I'm the lowest ranked, most expendable, and I'm the smallest. Better chance of moving unseen. Jimmy, Tucker started. No, I cut him off. Rousseau died so we could finish this. I'm not letting his kids grow up in a world where this evil spreads. Dorothy and our baby deserve better. Everyone deserves better. Wolcott gripped my shoulder. You'll need to get within 10 meters of the gateway. Place the charges at the base. Set the timer for 90 seconds. That gives you time to clear the blast radius. And if I don't clear it, then you'll have died a hero, Private Callahan. His eyes held respect I'd never earned before, just like Rousseau. Walsh distributed the remaining ammunition, 4 magazines each, plus grenades. Everything we had left for one final push. Tucker checked his rifle's scope, testing the sight picture on Graves' distant figure. I get one shot at the lieutenant, Tucker said, voice cold as Pittsburgh winter. I'm taking it. Make it count, Walsh replied. We all make it count. For the 32 men who came here. For the ones who didn't make it home. For every person who'll never know we saved them. O'Connor crossed himself. Wolcott lit what might be his last cigarette. Tucker chambered around with mechanical precision. Walsh gripped his machete like it was Excalibur, and I held the thermite charges, feeling their weight, understanding that in 90 seconds they'd either save the world or create a crater with my body at its center. On my mark, Walsh said, and I saw why Rousseau had trusted him. In crisis, the logistics officer had become a warrior. 3, 2, 1, go. We charged from the tree line, rifles blazing, grenades arcing through humid air, screaming not in fear but in rage, for Rousseau, for our brothers, for every innocent soul threatened by Operation Threshold. The things around the mound turned toward us, and behind them, Lieutenant Benjamin Graves smiled. He'd been waiting for this moment. So had I. The clearing erupted in gunfire and chaos. Tucker's first shot took Graves in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The lieutenant stumbled but didn't fall, and when he straightened, I saw the wound already closing, flesh knitting together with unnatural speed. He'd been exposed to the transmission too long. He was becoming one of them. "He's transforming!" Walcott shouted, firing controlled bursts at the figures surrounding the mound. "The gateway's changing him!" The transformed soldiers moved with inhuman coordination, flanking our position, while others formed a protective barrier around Graves and the opening. These weren't the shambling infected from the base. These were faster, smarter, retaining combat training while shedding human limitation. Walsh threw a grenade. The explosion tore through 3 of them, but they pulled themselves upright, bones jutting through torn flesh at impossible angles, and kept coming. "Jimmy, go!" Walsh roared, swinging his machete through the neck of something that had once been Private Morrison. "We'll hold them." "Get to that gateway." I ran low, using the smoke and chaos as cover. O'Connor laid suppressing fire to my left, his Chicago factory worker toughness showing through every precise shot. Walcott had abandoned his rifle for his sidearm, firing while simultaneously adjusting his radio equipment strapped to his back. "I'm broadcasting everything," Walcott yelled. "Every frequency. If anyone's listening outside this conspiracy, they'll know what's happening here." A transformed soldier lunged at me from the smoke. I fired point blank, the muzzle flash illuminating a face that might have been Brennan once. The impact threw him back, but he was already rising when Tucker's rifle cracked and he dropped permanently. "Keep moving!" Tucker screamed. "Don't stop! Don't look back." The gateway pulsed 50 meters away. 40, 30. Graves saw me coming. Blood streamed from his shoulder wound, but his eyes burned with that fevered light I'd seen when he opened the gateway. He raised his modified radio. "Extraction team, targets approaching primary node. Engage with extreme prejudice." From the jungle came the thump of rotor blades. The helicopters, early. "They changed the timeline." Walcott's voice cracked through the gunfire. "They knew we'd intercept. They were always coming earlier." 20 meters from the gateway, a transformed soldier tackled me from the side. We hit the ground hard, thermite charges spilling from my pack. The thing that had been a soldier pressed down with strength that cracked my ribs, face inches from mine, mouth opening impossibly wide to reveal throat structures designed for sounds no human could make. Walsh's machete burst through its chest from behind. He hauled me up with one hand, the other still gripping his weapon slick with black ichor. "Charges!" he gasped. "Get the charges!" I scrambled, gathering the thermite bundles while Walsh fought off 2 more attackers. His machete work was brutal, efficient, born from desperation and mathematics. Every swing calculated for maximum damage, minimum energy. 10 meters. Tucker's rifle clicked empty. He drew his sidearm, firing while backing toward us. I'm out of ammo." O'Connor threw him a magazine, his last one. "Make it count." Graves stepped into my path. His shoulder wound had completely healed, but his face was changing, bones shifting beneath skin, eyes repositioning, mouth widening. He was further along than the others, embracing the transformation rather than fighting it. "Private Callahan," he said, and his voice harmonized with the transmission, multiple tones speaking in unison. "You can't stop evolution. You can't close a door that was meant to open. Join us. Bring your child into a better world." "My child's gonna grow up human," I snarled, raising my rifle. He moved faster than possible, knocking the weapon aside. His hand closed around my throat, lifting me off the ground with casual strength. "Then your child will be born into a world of obsolete flesh, weak, dying, while we transcend." I couldn't breathe, couldn't fight his grip. Black spots danced across my vision. A gunshot cracked through the air. Graves' head snapped sideways, a perfect hole appearing in his temple. He dropped me, stumbling, and I saw Tucker standing 30 meters away, rifle braced against a tree for stability, eye still pressed to the scope. "That's for Russo, you traitorous bastard," Tucker said quietly. Graves fell to his knees, the transformation reversing as his brain ceased functioning. For a moment, his eyes cleared, and I saw Lieutenant Benjamin Graves again, not the monster he'd become, but the man he'd been before obsession consumed him. "Tell them," he whispered, blood trickling from his mouth. "Tell them I thought we could control it." Then he collapsed, and whatever he'd been died with him. The transformed soldiers froze, their coordination shattered with Graves's death. They stood motionless, confused, the hive mind that had directed them suddenly severed. "Now, Jimmy!" Walcott screamed. While they're disoriented, I ran the final meters to the gateway. Thermite charges clutched against my chest. The opening exhaled cold air that smelled like geological time and alien intent. The low, in darkness that went down for miles. Things moved, waiting, hungry. I placed the charges around the stone ring, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the timer. 90 seconds, that's all I needed to set. The helicopters broke through the canopy, spotlights blazing, rope ladders deploying, armed men in unmarked uniforms fast roped down, professional and lethal. "Secure the gateway," someone commanded. "Protect the primary node." Walcott's radio crackled. "Mayday! Mayday! This is Master Sergeant Frank Walcott broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Operation Threshold is active. Coordinates following. They're opening gateways to something beneath. Multiple sites compromised. This is not a drill." Bullets chewed the earth around me. Walsh and Tucker returned fire, but we were outnumbered 10-1. I set the timer. 90 seconds. 89. 88. "Fall back," I shouted. "Charges set. Get clear." But even as I ran, I knew we wouldn't all make it. And I was right. 60 seconds on the timer. We ran through hell while bullets chewed the jungle around us. The unmarked soldiers were professionals, precise, coordinated, ruthless. They weren't trying to capture us. They were trying to eliminate witnesses. O'Connor went down first. A 3-round burst caught him in the back as he covered our retreat. He hit the ground hard, blood spreading across his uniform. I tried to stop, to help, but Walsh grabbed my collar and dragged me forward. "He's gone. Keep moving." O'Connor pushed himself up on one elbow, facing the pursuing soldiers. He still had Tucker's last magazine, his Chicago factory worker hands, steady despite the pain, raised his sidearm. "Go!" he shouted at us. Then to the soldiers, "Come get some, you sons of bitches." His gunfire covered our escape for precious seconds. Then it stopped, and I knew Martin O'Connor from Chicago, who joined the army to escape factory work, had found a different kind of freedom in the Amazon jungle. 45 seconds. Walcott's radio equipment sparked and smoked from bullet impacts, but he kept broadcasting, kept transmitting our coordinates and the truth about Operation Threshold, even as his voice grew hoarse from shouting over the chaos. 17 sites. Multinational conspiracy. They're weaponizing ancient... A bullet caught his radio pack. The equipment exploded, shrapnel tearing through his back. Walcott stumbled, fell, but immediately started crawling, still trying to broadcast with damaged equipment held together by wire and determination. "Frank!" Tucker doubled back, grabbing Walcott under the arms. "No time." Walcott gasped, blood bubbling from his mouth. "Get Jimmy clear. He's got Russo's photograph. He's got the story. He has to make it. We don't leave men behind," Tucker said fiercely. "You do when they're already dead." Walcott shoved his notebook into Tucker's hands, pages filled with coordinates, frequencies, names, evidence, proof. "Get it to someone who'll listen, someone outside the conspiracy." 30 seconds. Walsh had taken a round in the leg but kept moving, machete in one hand, supporting his weight on Tucker with the other. "Private Callahan, that's an order. Run!" But Tucker didn't run. He stayed with Walcott, firing his last rounds at the advancing soldiers, buying seconds we desperately needed. The ground trembled. The thermite charges were reaching ignition temperature. "Tucker!" I screamed. "Move!" Raymond Tucker from Alabama, who'd kissed his girlfriend's photograph every morning, looked at me across 30 meters of jungle and smoke. He smiled, actually smiled, and raised Walcott's notebook high so I could see it. "Tell my girl I loved her," he shouted. "Tell her I died for something that mattered." 20 seconds. The transformed soldiers had recovered from their disorientation. They surged toward the gateway, trying to reach the charges, trying to stop the destruction of their precious node. Walsh planted his feet, machete raised, blocking their path. "Not one step further, you bastards." "Eugene, no!" I reached for him, but he pushed me away with surprising strength. "Someone has to slow them down. Someone has to make sure those charges blow." His logistics mind had calculated the mathematics of sacrifice, and the equation demanded his life. Get home to Dorothy. Get home to that baby. Live, damn it. Live for all of us. 15 seconds. I ran. God forgive me. I ran while Walsh fought impossible odds, while Tucker stayed with dying Walcott, while the men I'd served with made stands that would never be recorded in any official history. The jungle opened onto a small river, more creek than waterway, but deep enough. I dove in as the countdown reached 0. The thermite charges ignited with white-hot fury that turned night into day. The heat was immense even at 100 meters, driving water around me to boiling. The gateway collapsed, stone crumbling, earth imploding as the structure beneath lost integrity. The transmission stopped, just stopped. The heartbeat that had pulsed through my skull for days cut off like someone threw a switch, leaving silence so profound it hurt. I surfaced, gasping, ears ringing from the explosion. Smoke and fire consumed the clearing. The helicopters had pulled back, rotors screaming, pilots fighting to maintain control in the thermal updraft. Behind me, nothing moved. No gunfire, no voices, just crackling flames and falling timber. Walsh was gone. Tucker was gone. O'Connor and Walcott were gone. I was alone. I pulled myself onto the riverbank, clutching Russo's photograph and Walcott's notebook to my chest like sacred relics. My ribs screamed from Walsh's earlier save. Blood ran from a dozen cuts I couldn't remember receiving, but I was alive. 32 men had entered this jungle. One was leaving. The helicopters circled, searchlights sweeping the destruction. They'd be looking for survivors, not to rescue, but to eliminate, to tie up loose ends, to ensure Operation Threshold remained secret. I crawled into the undergrowth, moving away from the clearing, away from the death and sacrifice. Behind me, the gateway site burned, collapsing further with every minute. Whatever had been beneath, whatever graves had tried to unleash, was sealed again, for now. But Walcott's broadcast had gone out. 17 sites worth of coordinates, names, frequencies, Evidence scattered across emergency channels that someone, somewhere, might have heard. That had to be enough. It had to be. Because I couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't fight shadows and conspiracies and things that shouldn't exist. I was just Private James Callahan from Pittsburgh, and I wanted to go home. The jungle swallowed me, and I let it. Let the darkness hide me from circling helicopters. Let the sounds of normal wildlife, returning now that the transmission was silent, mask my movement. I walked east, toward the river that would lead to tributaries, toward villages that might have radios, toward civilization, and Dorothy, and the life I'd promised to return to. But with every step I carried ghosts. Russo's family photograph pressed against my heart, Wolcott's notebook in my pack, the memory of Tucker's smile, O'Connor's defiance, Walsh's mathematics of sacrifice, Brennan and Hayes lost to transformation, the 27 others who'd died because Lieutenant Benjamin Graves had believed humanity needed to evolve. I'd survived, but survival wasn't victory. It was just living with the cost. 6 weeks later, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Dorothy's hand trembled as she held our daughter for the first time. Sarah Marie Callahan, born October 28, 1967, weighing 6 pounds, 4 ounces, perfect, whole, human. I stood beside the hospital bed, watching my wife cry tears of joy while I fought back tears of a different kind, because I'd made it home. But I'd left 31 ghosts in an Amazon jungle that officially never held an American military installation. "She has your eyes," Dorothy whispered, smiling up at me with exhaustion and love. "Jimmy, she's beautiful." "She is," I managed, touching my daughter's tiny hand. Her fingers closed around mine with surprising strength, and I thought of Russo's photograph, of the family he'd died protecting, of the world he'd sacrificed everything to save. The official story was simple, clean, impossible to verify. Our unit had suffered casualties during a classified operation along the Brazilian border, hostile engagement with unknown forces, 29 men killed in action, 3 men missing, presumed dead. Only Private James Callahan recovered alive, found by local villagers 17 days after the incident, suffering from malaria and severe dehydration with no memory of events. They'd given me a Purple Heart, a medical discharge, and a pension package tied to an NDA that could land me in Leavenworth for life if I talked. They'd also given me psychiatric evaluations 3 times weekly, testing my story, probing for cracks in the amnesia narrative they'd constructed. I played the part. Confused veteran, traumatized survivor, memory wiped clean by jungle fever and psychological stress. They wanted to believe I didn't remember, needed to believe it, but I remembered everything. Wolcott's notebook sat hidden in a safety deposit box downtown, photocopied 3 times and distributed to people I trusted, with instructions to release the information if anything happened to me. Russo's photograph occupied the place of honor on my nightstand. Catherine, Maria, Vinnie Jr., and Rosa smiling forever in Boston sunlight. I'd tried contacting them, the families, tried to tell Russo's wife that her husband died a hero, tried to tell Tucker's girl that his last words were of her, but military intelligence had gotten there first, feeding them the official story, warning them that anyone claiming otherwise was suffering from delusions or seeking attention. The families believed the government. Why wouldn't they? Their loved ones had died serving their country in a classified operation. Tragic, honorable, final. Only I knew the truth. Only I carried the weight of what really happened in that jungle. Dorothy shifted Sarah to her other arm, studying my face with concern. "You're not sleeping again. I hear you walking at night, checking the windows, checking the locks, just adjusting to civilian life." I lied, kissing her forehead. "It takes time." What I didn't tell her, I was watching for unmarked cars that parked too long on our street, listening for helicopters that flew too low over our neighborhood, checking every stranger who looked at us twice, wondering if they were Operation Threshold cleanup crew, making sure I stayed silent. What I couldn't tell her, Walcott's final broadcast had reached someone. 4 of the 17 sites had been destroyed in geological incidents, cave collapses, explosions, fires that consumed equipment and personnel before anyone could respond. Accidents, the news called them, coincidences. But I knew better. Someone had listened. Someone outside the conspiracy had heard Walcott's dying transmission and acted on it. 13 sites remained, 13 gateways potentially active, 13 chances for Operation Threshold to resume. A knock on the hospital door made me jump. Dorothy noticed, but said nothing. A nurse entered with discharge papers and instructions for infant care. Normal, routine, safe. But as the nurse left, she pressed something into my hand. A business card with nothing but a phone number and 2 words, "We listened." I palmed the card quickly, heart hammering. Dorothy was focused on Sarah, cooing and counting tiny fingers. She didn't see the exchange, didn't see the nurse's meaningful look before she disappeared into the corridor. Someone knew. Someone was fighting back. I wasn't alone. That night, after Dorothy and Sarah fell asleep in our small Pittsburgh apartment, I stood by the window watching snow fall over the city, clean white snow covering dirty streets, making everything look pure and untouched. I thought about calling that number, about joining whatever resistance had formed against Operation Threshold, about continuing the fight that Russo, Walsh, Tucker, O'Connor, and Walcott had died for. But then Sarah made a small sound in her bassinet. Not distress, just baby noises. The sound of new life breathing in a world she didn't know had almost been transformed into something monstrous. I'd made a promise to come home. I'd kept that promise. But Russo had made me promise something else. To tell the story. To make sure their sacrifice meant something. To ensure justice found the men who'd orchestrated Operation Threshold. That promise, I was still keeping. I pulled out Walcott's notebook, opened it to a blank page in the back, and began writing. Everything. Every detail. Names, dates, coordinates, conversations. The truth that no official report would ever contain. Not for publication. Not yet, but for record, for evidence, for the day when someone with power and courage might finally expose Operation Threshold and bring its architects to justice. I wrote until dawn, until my hand cramped and coffee went cold. I wrote Russo's story, husband, father, hero, Walsh's mathematics of sacrifice, Tucker's unwavering loyalty, O'Connor's defiant courage, Walcott's dying broadcast. I wrote Lieutenant Benjamin Graves' descent from decorated officer to obsessed zealot and his final moment of clarity before death. I wrote about the things beneath the earth, ancient and patient, waiting for humanity to open doors that should remain sealed. And I wrote about failure, because we'd closed one gateway, destroyed one node, but Operation Threshold continued. 13 sites still active, governments still complicit, the conspiracy still protected by classification and power. We'd won a battle. We'd lost the war. That's what soldiers don't tell you about heroism. Sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes you sacrifice everything, and evil still wins. Sometimes you make it home, and the ghosts follow, and all you can do is bear witness and hope that someday someone will finish what you started. Sarah cried softly. I closed the notebook, tucked it away, and went to my daughter, picked her up gently, held her close, breathed in that new baby smell that meant hope and future and innocence. "Your Uncle Russo would have loved you," I whispered. Uncle Walsh would have calculated your growth percentiles. Uncle Tucker would have shown you pictures of Alabama. Uncle O'Connor would have taught you Chicago toughness. Uncle Walcott would have played you radio sounds to help you sleep. She couldn't understand, wouldn't remember, but I needed to say it, needed to speak their names, to keep them alive in whatever small way I could. Outside, an unmarked car drove slowly past our building. Second time tonight. They were watching, would always be watching, but they'd let me live because they thought I was broken, harmless, just another traumatized veteran haunted by memories. They were wrong. I was haunted, but I wasn't broken. I was a witness, and someday, when the time was right, when I found the right people, I would testify for Russo, for Walsh, for Tucker, for O'Connor, for Walcott, for the 31 men who died so my daughter could grow up human in a world worth living in. That was my burden, my purpose, my promise. Private James Callahan, sole survivor of Operation Night Harvest, the mission that never existed, remembering everything, waiting for justice, holding his daughter close. Some doors should never be opened. Some calls should never be answered, but some stories must be told, no matter the cost.